How am I supposed to get my car in or out with these things here? This is completely ridiculous. The bylaws are clear, Mr. Smith. You are required to use street parking effective immediately. To freezing air, flashing amber lights, and the smell of fresh asphalt. A worker in a neon vest was drilling into my driveway while his truck unloaded even more bright yellow retractable parking bollards. 22 of them were already lined up like jail bars across my concrete, completely trapping my car. My coffee was still sitting untouched on the kitchen counter. Standing on the sidewalk like she owned the street was our HOA president, Karen, wearing her signature pink fleece and holding a clipboard. By noon, a letter was taped to my front door with blue painter's tape. It informed me that the board had voted to reclassify my private driveway as shared overflow parking, and that I was now prohibited from blocking it with my personal vehicle. They also fined me $150 for attempting to move one of the bollards. She pointed at the bollards and replied, "New rules." Neighbors walked past with their eyes glued to the ground, pretending they didn't hear a thing. I tried the official route first. I sent a detailed email to all 5 board members explaining that I physically could not get my car out and that my deed clearly shows the driveway is part of my lot. Crickets. No response. I attended the next HOA meeting on May 3, 2024 in the clubhouse. Harsh fluorescent lights, stale coffee, folding chairs. When it was my turn to speak, I calmly laid out the situation. Karen immediately interrupted me, declared I was being hostile, and said this wasn't the time. Another board member chimed in that I now owed 3 separate fines, totaling $450, and warned they could tow my car if I parked on the street. After the meeting, one neighbor texted me anonymously, "Sorry, man, I have kids." That's when I realized the entire neighborhood was terrified of her. The final straw came the night she called the police on me for trespassing on my own driveway. I went outside in slippers to see if any bollards were loose. 10 minutes later, a patrol car arrived. The officer checked my ID, confirmed the address matched the house the driveway was attached to, and essentially shrugged before leaving. That little incident report became my first official piece of evidence. I decided I was done yelling or threatening to cut the bollards. I went full boring and proper instead. I compiled a binder, emails, call logs, everything. Then I drove to City Hall and requested the original subdivision file for our neighborhood. The clerk brought out a thick 63-page cardboard folder. I sat under the flickering lights and went page by page until I found it. My lot, my driveway, clearly labeled as private property and required off-street parking for the residents. The approved site plan also showed a 5-foot setback easement where no permanent structures were allowed. Every single bollard had been drilled straight through that line. Even better, for me, by turning my driveway into guest parking, the HOA had thrown the entire development's parking ratio out of compliance and partially blocked a marked fire lane turning radius in the cul-de-sac. I made copies of every relevant permit number and stamped page. My plan was simple, 100% legal, and required 0 screaming. I listed every violation: unpermitted construction, obstruction of required resident parking, setback encroachment, fire lane interference, and harassment via false police reports. I attached scans of the city-stamped plans and gave them 7 days to respond. Perfect. I printed it and added it to the binder. Next stop, formal complaints filed with both code enforcement and the building department. Binder delivered in person. 5 p.m. I heard diesel engines and looked outside. A city public works truck, a fire marshal SUV, a code enforcement sedan, and, for good measure, another police cruiser all rolled into our cul-de-sac with lights flashing. Half the neighborhood came out in pajamas, phones already recording. The building inspector stepped over one of the bollards, confirmed my name, then turned to Karen, who was speed walking over waving her clipboard. He held up the stamped site plan I had provided and said, "Ma'am, this is private property. You installed unpermitted obstructions and you're encroaching on a fire lane." He actually chuckled when his tape measure proved one bollard was drilled 2 inches onto my side of the property line. Someone across the street let out an audible snort. Code enforcement posted a giant red violation notice on the community bulletin board. The inspector announced, loud enough for the growing crowd, that the HOA faced up to $2,000 per day in fines if the bollards were not removed and my driveway restored to its original condition within 10 days. The fire marshal added that blocking emergency turning radius carried even steeper penalties. McCall looked at Karen and said, "We've received multiple questionable calls from this address." Everything was filmed. By that night, the videos were all over the neighborhood Facebook group with hundreds of comments dragging the HOA. People started posting screenshots of every petty fine Karen had ever issued. 3 days later, the HOA held an emergency meeting. I didn't even attend. The minutes were emailed to all owners. The board voted to spend reserve funds on a licensed contractor to remove every bollard, patch my concrete, and pay all city fines. A new, far more reasonable president was appointed. One warm June evening, I stood on my smooth, bollard-free driveway watching kids ride scooters across the very spot where the yellow bars used to be. My elderly neighbor, Mrs. Lopez, brought over a plate of homemade cookies and said, "Thank you for standing up to them." I just smiled. The best revenge was done with paperwork, patience, and the city's own stamped plans. Not a single raised voice required. Do you think Karen got what she deserved? Let me know in the comments and follow for more HOA horror stories with happy endings.